should get that fixed. Welcome to the first ever edition of the Pittsburgh Penguins Prospect Pyramid. Boy, is that a mouthful. Now, for those of you that don't know what a prospect pyramid is, it's pretty much a tier list, except it's hockey prospects. And the idea was kind of founded by Steve Dangle, who is a huge influence on this channel. He does his own version of this with the Toronto Maple Leafs, all on his channel. This is my attempt at doing it, but for the Pittsburgh Penguins, my favorite team. The reason why it's not a tier list and it's a pyramid is because good players don't grow on trees, and tier 1 and tier 2 are your really good prospects. Tier 1 is your generational players. Think Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, Alexander Ovechkin. The Penguins don't have any of them this year. I even put a haha there because they have not had one since Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin. In Steve's videos, the only player that ever reached tier 1 for him was Austin Matthews, so that's kind of the level that is for tier 1. Tier 2 is your NHL-ready prospects, players that are ready to jump into the NHL and make an impact. The best example I can currently think of would be in Montreal with both. They have Cole Caulfield there, they have Ryan Poehling there, they have Alexander Romanov there. They have a lot of NHL-ready prospects that would be in tier 2, and we'll get to where ours went in a second. Tier 3 and on is basically what you'd expect. It's just the next best, and then the next best, and the next best until we get into tier 6, which is everybody else. And there's a lot of everybody else's in the Penguins because, if we're going to be completely honest here, the Penguins have had one of, if not the worst prospect pools over the past decade. Not having good prospects is not a bad thing, though. Some of those picks and futures, first-round draft picks, prospects like, I guess Kasperi Kapanen's a bad example, but prospects were used to acquire guys like Carl Hagelin, Phil Kessel, Nick Bonino, and they've gotten us 3 Stanley Cups in this era. So balance that out with the other trades like the Ryan Reeves trade and giving up a first-round pick for Derek Brassard and also Kasperi Kapanen to get him back. The hard truth of it is that the Penguins have no prospects in either tier 1 or tier 2. Haha and traded are what I put there just as a placeholder because Jim Rutherford and before him Ray Shero have traded any good star prospects we've had. However, players, especially in the Pittsburgh Penguins organization, come out of nowhere. There's an ongoing joke in the hockey world that the Penguins can just find guys off the street, put them with Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, and they'll get 50 goals or something like that, like Mark Donk and Buzz Flisbit. This is kind of true when you look at some of the past graduates on the list. Last year's main addition to the Penguins roster was John Marino. Now, I didn't do this last year, but John Marino was not a really well-regarded prospect. He was traded for a 6th-round pick in Edmonton, so that's kind of the level of what his stock was worth just a year ago. Just about a week ago, he signed a 6-year extension worth around $4.5 million, and he's going to be an anchor on the blue line for the Penguins in the next coming years. Another recent example would be Teddy Bluger.
Teddy Bluger from Riga, Latvia!
Yeah, that one. He was a late 2nd-round pick, and the Penguins sent him to Wilkes-Barre for 4 straight years. He had to pay his dues there before he finally broke into the league last year, came out of nowhere, and scored 22 points. And he was the 4th-line center. Going back a little further, 3rd-round draft picks have turned into superstars for the Penguins. Brian Rust was a 3rd-round draft pick. Matt Murray, who of course is no longer on the team, he was a 3rd-round draft pick though, and he's got his name on the cup twice. Jake Gensel was a 3rd-round draft pick. The Penguins don't need to have players that are, the best regarded prospects to come into the league. Like, of course the Penguins would love an Alexis Lafreniere, but they can make do with those 3rd, 4th, and 5th-round picks. So my point here is even though the Penguins have one of, if not the worst batch of prospects in the league, all we need is 1 or 2 players to be the next John Marino, Teddy Bluger, Jake Gensel, and to step into the lineup. How impactful would another Jake Gensel be to this organization? Jake Gensel came out of nowhere. He scored 2 goals in his first NHL game as a Wilkes-Barre Scranton call-up against the Rangers. I'll never forget that game. So let's take a look at who those players could be this year. Now, I'm recording this right after the Penguins' 23-man roster was announced, and there's 6 players on the taxi squad. So we kind of already have an idea of what we know this season will look for the Penguins in terms of who's going to make the roster. Now, we'll start with the graduates. I already mentioned John Marino. I didn't do this last year, but John Marino absolutely graduated. He is a top 4 defenseman for the Penguins. So we start in tier 3 because I mentioned before GMJR and Ray Shiro have traded away pretty much any highly regarded prospects we have, and we start with perhaps the best prospect in the Penguins system. Samuel Pulan is regarded as probably the Penguins' best prospect right now. He was a first-round draft pick in 2019, which, side note, is a rarity for the Penguins. We either trade away the players that we draft as first-round picks, or we trade away the first-round picks in the first place. We do not have a draft pick. Or we did not have a draft pick in the 2020 first round, and we do not have one in 2021. Since Olimata is gone now, Pulan is the only first-round draft pick that has stayed within the Penguins organization since Sidney Crosby in 2005. Kasperi Kapanen is the enigma there because he was a first-round draft pick to the Penguins, but of course he was traded in the Phil Kessel trade, and then he came back. Everyone else was either traded, the pick was traded, or traded themselves, or was a bust, or was Bo Bennett or Joe Morrow, etc. Pulan was drafted 21st overall in the 2019 NHL draft. He's 19 years old, he's Canadian, he's a power forward right winger, and he plays for Sherbrooke Phoenix of the QMJHL, where he's also the captain. In 2019-20, in 46 games, Pulan tallied 77 points for the Sherbrooke Phoenix of the QMJHL, and he was a plus 45. His father, Patrick, used to play in the NHL as well. He never played for the Penguins, but he had an 11-year career and was a decent power forward. Elite Prospects lists Samuel Pulan as a very good all-round player, stating that he plays a good two-way game and that he has few weaknesses. He has a good work ethic and leadership qualities and is a solid point producer. So not the flashiest player by any means, but definitely still a useful power forward that the Penguins could use, given that Patrick Hornquist was just traded and that power forwards are very rare in the current age of the NHL. Pulan is signed to his entry-level contract, but of course he cannot, burn off a year of it, given the fact that we just sent him back down to juniors. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Pulan. He has a lot of pressure on him, given the fact that, he's the only first-round draft pick that's currently in the system that's not named Kasperi Kapanen or Sidney Crosby, which are different stories. Another 19-year-old 2019 draft pick by the Penguins is Nathan Legare, who is, side note, good friends with Samuel Pulan. He's a Canadian forward, and he also plays in the Q. He also has signed his entry-level contract. I specifically remember he signed it right after he scored 2 goals against the Blue Jackets in a preseason game, which was cool. Even though Pulan is regarded as probably the Penguins' best prospect, I think Legare could be a huge steal for the Penguins. The Athletic had him ranked at 29th, as high as 29th, despite the Penguins drafting him in the 3rd round at 74th overall. Legare is playing in the queue as well for Beo Kromo Drakkar. In his last full season, he had 71 points in 61 games. Taylor Haas also pointed out that he's averaging 5.7 shots per game, which is the highest in the entire queue. My expectations for Legare are honestly about the same as I have for Pulan, despite him being drafted 2 rounds later. I really think the Penguins have another gem with Legare. I mean, they have been amazing at drafting in the 3rd round for some reason. I mean, you got Matt Murray, Jake Gensel, Brian Rust, and hopefully Legare here soon. Go back a couple years, well, not even a couple, go back a bunch of years, and Chris Letang was a 3rd round pick as well. Now, Legare, of course, did not make the team this year. He's going to go back to the queue. I think he needs a little bit more time than, say, Pulan to develop, but I think, honestly, in the end of it, he might be the better player. So the 2 players that we have in tier 3 that we've went over are not making the Penguins this year. If they do, they would have to come in due to some emergency loan, but because they're back in juniors now. But the player that could make the Penguins this year is Pierre-Olivier Joseph, who is the only remaining straggler from that Phil Kessel trade that we shall not talk about. Joseph is a 6'2" Canadian defenseman who is regarded as a decent prospect for the Penguins and has a good shot at being an extra defenseman, if not in the lineup for the Pens this season. He was drafted 23rd overall in 2017 by the Arizona Coyotes. Of course, he was traded down in the Phil Kessel trade. His brother, Matthew Joseph, of the Tampa Bay Lightning, just won his first Stanley Cup. He's 2 years older than him, so hopefully that'll give him some motivation, maybe. Joseph is now officially out of juniors, given the fact that he was drafted 4 years ago now. He played in Wilkes-Barre last year, and he had 17 points in 52 games. Now, before you say that, well, that's not enough, he's a defenseman. He's not a very offensive defenseman. He's more of a a solid, I don't know, run-of-the-mill standard defenseman. This is not the next Chris Letang or heck, even John Marino. But he still could be a very solid and serviceable and useful defenseman for the Penguins. I kind of see like maybe the next Oli Mata in Pierre-Olivier Joseph. He's not going to be a superstar by any means, but he definitely could be useful like Oli Mata was when he wasn't injured. Overall, in this tier, we have a lot of prospects that are pretty much the ones that are left for the Penguins, given the fact that we've traded away who are our good prospects. But as I mentioned again, all it takes is one player to come out of the fray and just impress, like John Marino or Jake Gensel or Brian Rust. Given the fact that the Penguins traded their 2021 first round pick and their 2020 first round pick, these are the prospects for the Penguins in not just this year, but the next years moving forward, because we're not getting more here. We traded, I think we have 4 picks already gone in the next year's draft, including our first. So there's a lot of pressure on these guys. I don't think they're going to be superstars by any means, but they could definitely help the Penguins. Moving on to tier 4. I'm going to make a bold prediction here and say that someone in this tier will play for the Penguins this upcoming season, because we had, of course, the 23-man roster announced today, but we also had the taxi squad announced today, and one of those players is Drew O'Connor, college free agent, undrafted, came to the Penguins. He's 22-year-old forward, and he likes to shoot the puck. He impressed the hell out of everyone at training camp. There was a point in training camp where he took Colton Sevier's spot on the 4th line just in normal line rushes, and it really looks like Drew O'Connor might be the first call-up when an injury happens, if not making the team from the get-go. He signed his entry-level deal right out of Dartmouth College, and in his time in college, he had 38 career goals. He's a big, sizable, 200-pound player. He's 6'3" as well. He's not the most skilled or talented player because, of course, the Penguins don't have that in prospects anymore. But I really think he could help solidify the Penguins' bottom 6, which is something that the Penguins really need to work out. The Penguins' top 6 is pretty strong if you look at it, honestly. You got Crosby, Malkin, Rust, Gensel, Zucker, and I guess Kapanen now, even though I don't think he's a top 6 player. That's still strong, though. Bottom 6, Brandon Tanev, okay. Who's your third line center? Who's your left winger on the third line? Drew O'Connor, hopefully Samuel Pulan in the next year, and maybe Nathan Legare can help the Penguins solidify their bottom 6. And I'm really excited for Drew O'Connor this season. Do not be surprised when he makes his NHL debut and scores a hattie. Never know with the Penguins, right? The Penguins have had their success with college players in the past few years too, with both the Brian Rust and Brian Dumoulin. And then, I mean, I guess if you want to go back and say Chris Kunitz, John Marino also came out of college. The Penguins are pretty good at picking NCAA players, and hopefully O'Connor can be the one for this upcoming season. All right, we're 4 names in, and we're already to the area where I don't see any of these players having a significant impact on the Penguins team now or in the future. Sorry to these guys if you're watching, which I doubt you are. Kasper Bjornquist is the next name on our list. He was a 2nd-round pick in 2016 by the Penguins. He plays in the Finnish Liga, and he's good, but he's nothing incredible. Future Considerations states that he processes strong determination. He never seems to quit on a play. He shows a good stick and decent positioning in the defensive zone. Now he's currently playing in the Finnish Liga, which is, I guess, the professional league for Finland. He has 13 points in 21 games there. He hasn't really impressed with the Penguins, though, despite, having a decent amount of points in the Finnish Liga. He was not on the Penguins training camp roster, and he's going to stay in the Finnish Liga this entire season. Jonathan Grudin. He was a 4th-round pick by the Ottawa Senators in 2018. He came over in the Matt Murray trade. And I'm going to be honest here, it was honestly kind of hard to find stuff on John Grudin because apparently the Raiders of the NFL have a coach who has the same name as him. Grudin, the hockey player, he's 20 years old. He's an American forward, only 170 pounds, and he had 66 points in 50 games with the London Knights. So that's a very prestigious CHL organization, and it's good to see him going over a point per game in that. However, he will probably play in Wilkes-Barre for the entirety of this season, if not go back to juniors. I think he's over the age now, though. He did not make the Penguins training camp roster, and he also did not make the Penguins roster overall. He could be a serviceable next Wilkes-Barre call-up in the next couple of years for the Penguins, but I really don't see much out of John Grudin. A player that has been in Wilkes-Barre, though, for about 2-3 seasons now, going on 3 seasons now, is Jordy Bellerive. He's a 21-year-old center for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. He's really starting to come into his own in the AHL. He totaled 22 points last year in 53 games. He shows all the signs of becoming like the next Sam Lafferty. Good Wilkes-Barre player, could potentially be called up in an injury situation, could impress. Maybe he won't. Maybe they'll give him another chance. He did not make the Penguins taxi squad roster, though, or of course the training camp roster. So he's probably going to spend this year in Wilkes-Barre as well. But in the next couple of years, I could see him being maybe the next, go-to call-up player for the Penguins. All right, moving on. Tier 5. Kind of just guys that I felt skeptical if I should even put on the board because they're borderline in the everybody else category. Now, let's start with someone that's actually played in the NHL. He's played 8 games so far. He scored his first NHL goal last year, and he's on the taxi squad for the upcoming season. That's Anthony Angelo. Angelo, good Wilkes-Barre center. That's pretty much it. And he's a player that isn't the best, most skilled player, but he's a safe bet if you want to kill like 8 minutes a night on the fourth line and you need someone to plug a hole in with an injury. Angelo is not going to be the Penguins top 6 forward in the next couple of years, like maybe Samuel Pulan or Nathan Legare will be. He'll be that maybe fourth line center for the Penguins, and he'll be the Wilkes-Barre call-up that we'll probably go to first when injuries happen. The reason why I have him so low is because overall, when you look at him as a player, he's not the most skilled compared to these guys. So even though has the most seniority on this entire list here because he's played 8 games in the NHL, and I honestly could have put him in graduates because he made it to the NHL. Angelo is pretty much just a Wilkes-Barre player. Moving on to a player who I'm not even sure how to pronounce his name. Another college free agent signing by the Penguins, Jonathan Maniscalco, as I want to say it. Again, college free agent. Penguins have had luck with college free agents. Another undrafted player. He's a 21-year-old defenseman, 52 points in 71 games in his entire collegiate career in Arizona State. I really don't have much to say about this guy because I really don't know much about him, but the thing I do know is that Jim Rutherford, despite how some of his trades may have been super crazy, he's been pretty good with bringing in young defensemen over the past few years. It's now hopefully going to be 3 straight years where the Penguins have found a young defenseman that has emerged into the top 6. Marcus Pettersson, who was traded for Daniel Sprong, get him out of here. Give us a top 4 defenseman from Anaheim. And then, of course, John Marino last year. I really don't trust Jim Rutherford in terms of trades anymore, and also free agent signings, and also how he manages the team pretty much overall anymore. But I do trust how he's good at finding just random project defensemen. And maybe Maniscalco can be the next one for the Penguins. Emil Larmy, he probably has the toughest chance of making the team within the next couple of years, given the fact that he's a goalie. And the Penguins have 2 good goalies right now that are both young, and Casey DeSmith and Tristan Jarry. Larmy, really the only thing I have to say about him is that he's hilarious. He's a 24-year-old Finnish goaltender, and his social media is great. You should go follow him on Twitter and Instagram. He's bounced around the past couple of years. He was with the Nailers, he was with Wilkes-Barre, and now he's in the Finnish Liga. It'll be a while before he'll honestly get a shot, given the fact that we have 2 solid goaltenders right now. But with injuries, you never know. However, he did not make the taxi squad, and he's more of a prospect for the Penguins, while guys like Maxim Lagacé is the 3rd string goaltender for the Penguins. Continuing the trend of having pretty much everyone on this list be undrafted, because the Penguins don't draft anymore, they just sign random players. Radim Zohorna is a Czech forward who's currently lighting up the league in the Czech league, who actually is playing in the season right now. He has 22 points in 21 games so far. He signed a 1-year deal with the Penguins. He'll likely spend the upcoming season in the AHL. He did make the Penguins training camp roster, but just missed out on the taxi squad. He could develop into a good Swiss Army knife for Wilkes-Barre and maybe the Penguins. He has a lot of good qualities that you would want in an AHL prospect. He's 24, 229 pounds, and yeah, he pretty much has both size and experience. Next up, we pretty much have another Wilkes-Barre player that maybe could jump up for the Penguins with injuries, Sam Militek. He will likely spend the entire year developing in Wilkes-Barre again. He's a 23-year-old American forward who he will be entering his third season with Wilkes-Barre in the AHL. In 2 years in the AHL so far, Militek had 67 points in 111 games. At best, Militek will likely be used as a Wilkes-Barre call-up for the Penguins. You are much rather to burn off a year of Militek's entry-level contract before you were to get someone like Pulan or Legare. Maybe they fail and you burn off a year of their contract. Instead, Militek is much more of a safe bet, along with Angelo, to just plug in the fourth line for a couple games until Malkin comes back from whatever injury he's on this time. Sadly, a lot of these players pretty much is just Wilkes-Barre maybe call-ups into the NHL. But again, you never know with the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's crazy. The Penguin, Mark Donk and Buzz Flisbit, you never know who can just break into the league with the Penguins, especially with all the injuries that we always have every season. So there's pretty much my overall 2021 Penguins prospect pyramid. I think I'm going to make a video like this every year. So your support on the first one would be greatly appreciated. Today is Monday. Wednesday is the start of the NHL season, so I'm very excited to get started there with PFRs. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate your support, and thank you all for 50 subscribers. I know that's not, crazy by any means, but it really does mean a lot to me that, people are starting to take notice. If you don't like my opinions, well, too bad. These are my own opinions. I will catch you all in the next video for PFRs. Be sure to sub for Subspace, and I'll see you guys then.